What happens when a most powerful warrior race in the galaxy mistakes humanity's greatest weapon for weakness? Princess Zara-Th of the Vorthak Empire believed she had married a gentle, harmless human scholar named David Chun. For 3 years, she watched him tend his books, care for injured animals, and speak softly to everyone he met. Her people whispered that she had chosen poorly, a weak mate from a primitive species that barely survived first contact with galactic civilization. But when an ancient enemy returns to threaten everything David holds dear, Zara-Th discovers that humanity's true power was never in their technology or their numbers. It was in something far more terrifying than any weapon her warrior race had ever conceived. Something that had been sleeping quietly beside her all along, wearing the gentle face of the man she thought she knew. The galaxy is about to learn why humans don't just survive, they protect. And when they protect, entire star systems tremble. Princess Zara-Th of the Vorthak Empire stood on the crystal balcony of her tower, watching her husband tend to the wounded creatures in their private sanctuary. David Chun moved with the same careful precision he brought to everything, his human hands gentle as he cleaned the torn wing of a small flying creature that had crashed into their garden during the morning storm. The sight filled her with the familiar mixture of love and worry that had become her constant companion over their 3 years of marriage. Love because David possessed a kindness that seemed to radiate from his very soul, touching everything around him with a warmth her warrior people rarely understood. Worry because that same gentleness made him appear weak to the Vorthak nobles who questioned her choice in a mate. The human tends to beast again, came the familiar voice of General Kordax from behind her. Zara-Th didn't turn to acknowledge her father's military advisor, keeping her eyes fixed on David as he carefully applied a healing gel to the creature's wing. Such domestic activities are beneath the mate of a Vorthak princess. David shows compassion, Zara-Th replied, her voice carrying the authority she had inherited from generations of warrior queens. It is not weakness. Your mother would have chosen a Vorthak warrior, Kordax continued, his tone carefully neutral, but his meaning clear. Someone who could stand beside you when the Empire faces its enemies. Someone who could protect you. Zara-Th finally turned to face the general, her violet eyes flashing with controlled anger. Standing nearly 8 feet tall, with the characteristic chitinous armor plating that covered her shoulders and arms, she towered over most beings in the galaxy. David was one of the few who could meet her eyes when they stood together, though he was built lean where her people were broad and powerful. David does protect me, she said firmly, in ways you cannot understand. Kordax bowed his head respectfully, but she could see the skepticism in his expression. Of course, Princess. I merely worry about the coming challenges our empire may face. The borders grow restless, and there are rumors of movement in the contested zones. Before Zara-Th could respond, David's voice called up from the garden below. Zara, could you come down here for a moment? I think this little one might respond better to your touch. She smiled despite her annoyance with Kordax. David had learned early in their relationship that many of the galaxy's creatures found her people's natural bioelectric fields soothing, something that complemented his own gentle approach to healing. It was one of the many small ways he honored her nature rather than fearing it. I'll be right there, she called back, then fixed Kordax with a stern look. We will speak of this later, General. But remember that my choice of mate was mine to make, and it was made with both my heart and my mind. As she made her way down the spiral staircase to the garden, Zara-Th reflected on how she had first met David. It had been during a diplomatic mission to Earth, one of the newer members of the Galactic Alliance. The Vorthak Empire had been invited to observe human culture and assess their potential as allies or threats. Most of her delegation had focused on human military capabilities, which seemed laughably primitive compared to Vorthak technology. But Zara-Th had been drawn to the universities, fascinated by how humans organized and preserved knowledge. That's where she had found David, a xenobiology professor who specialized in comparative anatomy across species. He had been lecturing to a room full of students about the importance of understanding alien physiology for medical treatment, his passion for the subject evident in every word. What had struck her most was how he spoke about other species, not as subjects to be studied, but as beings deserving of understanding and respect. When she introduced herself after his lecture, He had looked directly into her eyes without flinching, despite her intimidating size and alien features. His first question wasn't about her armor or her strength, but about whether Vorthack biology included the capacity for empathy. The question had surprised her so much that she had given him an honest answer instead of the diplomatic response she would have offered anyone else. Yes, she had told him Vorthack felt emotions deeply, but their culture prioritized strength and honor above emotional expression. They had spent the next hour discussing the balance between cultural evolution and biological imperatives, and she had found herself more intellectually stimulated than she had been in years. Zara, David's voice brought her back to the present as she entered the garden. He was kneeling beside a small enclosure where the injured creature rested, his brown eyes showing the concern that seemed to be his natural state when dealing with anything vulnerable. She knelt beside him, careful not to let her weight damage the delicate plants around them. The creature, something like a cross between a bird and a small dragon, looked up at them with large, frightened eyes. When Zara extended her hand slowly, the bioelectric field that naturally surrounded her people began to pulse in a calming rhythm. "There we are," David murmured, as the creature relaxed under her touch. "I've seen this species before, but never this close. Look at the bone structure in its wings. Completely unique adaptation for atmosphere pressure differences." Even in a moment like this, David's scientific mind was engaged. It was one of the things she loved most about him, his ability to find wonder and knowledge in everything around him. But it was also one of the things that made others dismiss him as merely academic, someone more suited to libraries than the dangerous realities of galactic politics. "The bone density suggests it's from a high-gravity world," Zara observed, running her large finger gently along the creature's back. "Probably got caught in a transport ship and ended up here." "Exactly what I was thinking," David said with a smile. "We'll need to contact the transport authority and see if we can get it home safely." This was typical David, not content to simply heal the creature and release it, but committed to ensuring its long-term well-being. It was a level of care that extended to everything he touched, from the injured animals they treated to the way he had slowly and patiently learned about Vorthack culture so he could better understand her world. As they worked together to make the creature more comfortable, Zara found herself thinking about the challenges their marriage had faced. The Vorthack nobles had been skeptical from the beginning, questioning whether a human could understand the complexities of their society. Some had been openly hostile, suggesting that she was weakening the bloodline by choosing a mate from what they considered a lesser species. David had faced every challenge with the same quiet dignity he brought to everything else. When challenged to ritual combat by one of her suitors, he had politely declined and instead challenged the warrior to a test of knowledge, demonstrating such a comprehensive understanding of Vorthack history and law that he had earned grudging respect. When questioned about his ability to contribute to the Empire, he had quietly begun developing new medical techniques that combined human and Vorthack knowledge, saving lives that might otherwise have been lost. But perhaps most importantly, he had never tried to change her. While some potential mates had seemed intimidated by her strength and authority, David celebrated these aspects of her nature. He understood that her position came with responsibilities that would always be part of their relationship, and he supported her duties rather than competing with them. "I had another argument with Cordax today," she told him as they finished securing the creature's enclosure. David's hands stilled for a moment before he continued his work. "About us. About the Empire's security. About whether I chose the right mate for the challenges ahead." She kept her voice neutral, but she could see David's slight flinch at the words. "And what do you think?" he asked quietly. Zara turned to face him fully, placing her large hands on either side of his face. Even sitting, she was taller than he was, but the way he looked at her made her feel as though they were equals in every way that mattered. "I think," she said slowly, "that strength comes in many forms, and that the greatest battles are not always won with weapons." David smiled, but she could see the shadow of worry in his eyes. "I know the nobles think you could have done better. Someone from your own people, someone who could stand with you in battle if needed." "David," her voice was firm enough to make him meet her eyes again. "I chose you not despite who you are, but because of who you are. Your strength is not the same as ours, but it is real. I have seen you calm a situation that could have led to war with nothing but words and understanding. I have watched you solve problems that our greatest warriors could not touch. That is not weakness. Before David could respond, a chiming sound echoed through the garden. Zara Th's communication device was signaling an urgent message from the palace. She activated it with a touch, and General Kordax's voice filled the air, tense with barely controlled alarm. Princess Zara Th, you must return to the palace immediately. We have received word from our deep space monitoring stations. The Shadari have returned. The device went silent, but the weight of those words seemed to hang in the air between them. Zara Th felt her blood run cold, her hands unconsciously clenching into fists. The Shadari, ancient enemies of the Vorthak Empire, creatures of nightmare and destruction that had vanished from the galaxy 500 years ago. Zara, David's voice was concerned but calm. Who are the Shadari? She realized that in all their conversations about Vorthak history, she had never spoken of the Shadari. They were too dark a part of her people's past, too terrible to discuss casually. But now it seemed that past was returning to threaten their future. An enemy we thought was extinct, she said slowly, standing and helping David to his feet. Parasitic beings that consumed the life force of entire worlds. They nearly destroyed the Vorthak Empire 5 centuries ago before we finally managed to drive them into the void between galaxies. David absorbed this information with the same thoughtful attention he gave to everything else. And now they're back? It would seem so. Zara Th felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. As heir to the Vorthak throne, she would be expected to take a leading role in whatever response the Empire chose. We should return to the palace immediately. As they made their way back toward the tower, David walking beside her with his characteristic quiet presence, Zara Th found herself wondering what role he would play in the coming crisis. The Vorthak military would look to their warriors for leadership, and the nobles would expect strength and aggression in response to this ancient threat. But something deep in her heart told her that this crisis would require more than traditional Vorthak approaches. The Shadari had been defeated before, but barely and at terrible cost. Perhaps this time would require different kinds of strength, different kinds of wisdom. Perhaps this time would require the gentle scholar who walked beside her to reveal whatever depths lay beneath his quiet exterior. As they entered the palace and made their way toward the throne room where the military council was gathering, Zara Th noticed something she had never seen before. David's usual relaxed posture had shifted almost imperceptibly, his movements becoming more precise and controlled. His eyes, normally warm and open, had taken on sharper focus. For just a moment, as he paused at the entrance to the throne room and surveyed the assembled generals and nobles, Zara Th saw something flicker across his features that she didn't recognize. Something that made her wonder if perhaps she didn't know her gentle husband as well as she thought she did. Then the moment passed, and David was once again the calm, supportive presence at her side as she took her place among the leaders of the Vorthak Empire to face the return of their greatest enemy. The throne room of the Vorthak Empire buzzed with tension as military leaders and noble houses gathered around the central holographic display. Emperor Vextar, Zara Th's father, stood at the head of the assembly, his massive frame radiating the controlled power that had made him one of the most feared rulers in the galaxy. The battle scars across his chitinous armor told the story of countless victories, but Zara Th could see the concern in his golden eyes as he studied the incoming reports. "Show them what our scouts discovered," the Emperor commanded, his voice carrying easily across the vast chamber. General Kordax activated the holographic display, and images began to materialize in the air above them. Zara Th felt her breath catch as she recognized the distinctive crystalline structures that had haunted Vorthak nightmares for centuries. Shadari hive ships, massive organic vessels that pulsed with dark energy, had been spotted at the edge of the Kepler Nebula. Reconnaissance confirms 17 hive ships, Kordax reported, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the threat. They appear to be conducting harvesting operations on the uninhabited worlds of the frontier systems. Our intelligence suggests they are rebuilding their strength before moving into more populated space. David stood slightly behind Zara Th, observing the proceedings with the same quiet attention he brought to his academic work. But She noticed that his eyes moved constantly, studying not just the holographic data, but the faces and reactions of everyone in the room. It was behavior she had seen before during diplomatic functions, but never with such intensity. "How many ships do we currently have in the border fleets?" asked Duke Morgan, one of the senior military advisors. 43 battle cruisers and supporting vessels, Admiral Kriksta responded. "But, Your Majesty, if I may speak frankly, conventional warfare proved insufficient against the Shadari in the past. Our victory 5 centuries ago came only after terrible losses and desperate measures." A murmur of agreement rippled through the assembly. Every Vorthak knew the stories of the ancient war. Entire star systems drained of life, warrior fleets consumed by creatures that seemed to exist beyond the normal rules of physics and biology. The Vorthak had ultimately prevailed, but only by sacrificing nearly half their empire and employing weapons so terrible they had sworn never to use them again. "The humans have advanced considerably since first contact," Emperor Vextar said, his gaze moving to David. "What can Earth contribute to our defense?" David stepped forward slightly, his posture respectful but confident. "Earth's fleet is modest compared to the Vorthak Empire, Your Majesty. Perhaps 50 ships of various classes. However, human technology has developed along different paths than Vorthak engineering. We might be able to offer alternative approaches." "Alternative approaches?" Duke Morgan's tone carried obvious skepticism. "Young human, the Shadari are not a problem to be solved with academic theories. They are devourers of worlds, parasites that exist only to consume and destroy." Zarth felt her anger flare at the dismissive tone, but before she could speak, David's voice cut through the chamber with unexpected authority. "With respect, Duke Morgan, every enemy can be understood and defeated. The key is identifying the right approach." His brown eyes met the Duke's gaze steadily. "What specific weaknesses did the Vorthak exploit in their previous victory?" The question hung in the air, and Zarth realized that none of the assembled leaders had a good answer. The ancient victory had been achieved through desperation and sacrifice rather than tactical brilliance. The specific mechanisms of the Shadari defeat had been lost to time and the chaos of war. Emperor Vextar leaned forward with interest. "Explain your thinking, David Shun." "Every organism, no matter how alien, follows certain biological imperatives," David said, his voice taking on the same tone he used in his lectures. "The Shadari feed on life force, which suggests they require specific conditions to process that energy. They also reproduce through hive ships, indicating a complex social structure with potential vulnerabilities." General Kordax brought up additional data on the holographic display. "Our historical records show that Shadari cannot remain in normal space indefinitely. They must periodically return to what our ancestors called the Dark Realm to regenerate." "Interdimensional travel," David mused, studying the data with obvious fascination. "That's significant. If they're dependent on access to alternate dimensions, that dependency could be exploited." "How?" Admiral Kriksta asked, her tone showing grudging interest. "I would need to study the historical records more thoroughly," David replied. "But every interdimensional system requires specific conditions to maintain stability. Disrupt those conditions, and you could potentially trap them in normal space where they would be more vulnerable to conventional attack." The assembled leaders exchanged glances, and Zarth could see that David's approach was gaining consideration. His ability to think about problems from entirely different angles was one of the things that had first attracted her to him, but she had never seen him apply it to matters of war. "How long would such a study require?" the Emperor asked. "Give me access to your historical archives and scientific databases," David said. "I can have preliminary findings within 72 hours. And what makes you think human perspectives will reveal something our greatest scholars have missed?" Duke Morgan challenged. For the first time since entering the throne room, David smiled. But there was something different about this expression, sharper, more calculating than his usual gentle humor. Because, Duke Morgan, humans have spent their entire existence as prey animals on a world full of apex predators. We became very good at finding ways to defeat enemies who were bigger, stronger, and more dangerous than we were. It's what we do. The simple confidence in his voice sent a chill through Zarth. Not fear, but a strange recognition that there was something in her husband's tone that she had never heard before. Something that suggested depths beneath the surface that even she hadn't fully understood. Emperor Vextar nodded slowly. Very well. General Kordax will provide you with full access to our historical archives. Admiral Krixta, prepare our fleets for defensive positions, but do not advance on the enemy until we have more information. As the formal council session concluded and the various leaders dispersed to their duties, Zaratich found herself walking beside David through the palace corridors. The weight of the situation pressed down on both of them, but she noticed that David seemed more focused rather than more worried. "You surprised me in there," she told him as they made their way toward the archives. "How so?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew what she meant. "You sounded like a military strategist, not a xenobiology professor." She paused in the corridor, studying his face. "David, is there something about your background that you haven't told me?" For a moment, his expression became completely unreadable. Then he smiled his familiar, gentle smile and took her hand in his. "I'm exactly who you think I am, Zara. A scholar who cares about understanding the universe and everything in it." His thumb traced across her knuckles, a gesture that had always soothed her. "But you're facing a threat to everything you love that brings out aspects of people that don't usually surface." Before she could pursue the question further, they arrived at the entrance to the palace archives. The vast chamber stretched out before them, filled with crystalline storage devices that contained thousands of years of Vorthack history and knowledge. David paused at the threshold, his eyes taking in the scope of information available to him. "I'll need to cross-reference biological data with historical battle reports," he said, his voice already taking on the focused tone he used for complex research. "If you have other duties to attend to, I can work alone." "I'm staying with you," Zaratich said firmly. "This affects my people. I want to understand what we're facing." They spent the next several hours immersed in the records of the ancient war. David's approach was methodical and thorough, building a comprehensive picture of Shadari biology and behavior from fragments scattered across centuries of documents. Zaratich found herself impressed not just by his analytical skills, but by his ability to synthesize information from completely different sources into coherent theories. "Look at this," David said, highlighting a section of text on the holographic display. "Battle report from the siege of Krauker Prime. The Vorthack commander notes that Shadari attacks become less coordinated during solar flare activity." "I remember that battle from the historical accounts," Zaratich said, "but no one ever explained the connection to solar flares." "Electromagnetic interference," David explained, his excitement growing as the pattern became clearer. "If the Shadari used some form of quantum entanglement for communication between dimensions, electromagnetic disturbances would disrupt their coordination." He pulled up additional records, cross-referencing battle outcomes with astronomical data. The pattern that emerged was compelling. Shadari forces showed measurably reduced effectiveness when fighting in systems with high electromagnetic activity. "This could be the key," Zaratich breathed, understanding the implications. "If we could artificially generate that kind of interference, we could cut them off from their interdimensional support," David finished. "Make them vulnerable to conventional weapons." As they continued their research, Zaratich noticed something else about David's approach to the problem. While his methods were scholarly, his thinking had a distinctly tactical edge. He didn't just want to understand the Shadari. He wanted to find ways to hurt them. It was a side of her gentle husband that she had never seen before, and it both impressed and concerned her. "David," she said during a brief break in their work, "where did you learn to think like this?" "Like what?" he asked, but she could see the slight tension in his shoulders. "Like someone who has experience with warfare." She kept her voice gentle but persistent. "The way you immediately focused on weaknesses and vulnerabilities, the questions you asked about their defeat, that's not normal academic curiosity." David was quiet for a long moment, staring at the data displays without really seeing them. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that she had never heard before. "Every human grows up learning about war, Zara. It's the story of our entire species. We've been fighting each other for thousands of years, developing increasingly sophisticated ways to kill and destroy. When we finally reached the stars, we brought all of that knowledge with us." "But you're not a soldier," she said softly. "No," he agreed. "I'm not. But I am human, and humans have been surviving impossible odds for a very long time. Sometimes that knowledge stays with you even when you choose a different path. Before Zarth could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the palace. The crystal walls pulsed with emergency lighting as automated systems activated, and General Kordax's voice echoed through the communication network. All senior staff to the command center immediately. The Shadari have accelerated their timeline. 3 hive ships are approaching the outer colonies. David and Zarth exchanged grim looks as they hurried toward the command center. Their research had yielded promising theoretical results, but theory would be worthless if the enemy reached populated systems before they could develop practical applications. As they ran through the corridors of the palace, Zarth caught another glimpse of the change in David's demeanor. His movements had become more efficient, more purposeful. His eyes swept their surroundings with the awareness of someone expecting danger. Whatever buried aspects of his nature were surfacing, they were transforming her scholarly husband into something else entirely. The command center was in chaos when they arrived, with tactical displays showing the approaching Shadari forces and defensive fleets moving to intercept. Emperor Vextar stood at the central command station, his presence bringing order to the frantic activity around him. Status report, he commanded as they approached. 3 hive ships have broken from the main group, Admiral Krixtar reported. They're moving at unprecedented speed toward the Altair colony. Our nearest battle group is 6 hours away. 6 hours, Duke Morgan said grimly. They could drain an entire world in that time. David stepped forward, his voice cutting through the despair. Not if we can implement the electromagnetic interference strategy. All eyes turned to him, and Zarth saw something in her husband's expression that made her heart race. It was the look of someone who had moved beyond theory into action, someone who was ready to do whatever was necessary to protect what mattered. Explain quickly, the Emperor commanded. If we can generate massive electromagnetic pulses in the Altair system, we can disrupt their interdimensional communication, David said, his words coming rapidly but clearly. It won't stop them completely, but it will make them vulnerable to conventional attack. How do we generate that kind of interference? Admiral Krixta asked. David's smile was sharp and dangerous. We overload their own systems and use the feedback against them. The plan that followed was audacious, risky, and completely unlike anything the Vorthak military had ever attempted. But as David outlined the technical details with increasing confidence and authority, Zarth realized that her gentle husband was revealing skills and knowledge that went far beyond anything she had imagined. The question that haunted her as the fleet prepared to depart was simple. Who exactly had she married? The Vorthak battle cruiser Sovereign's Wrath cut through hyperspace toward the Altair system with unprecedented urgency. In the ship's primary tactical center, David stood before a holographic display showing the approaching Shadari hive ships, his fingers dancing across control interfaces with a fluidity that surprised even the veteran naval officers around him. The electromagnetic pulse needs to be precisely calibrated, David explained to the assembled tactical team. Too weak, and it won't disrupt their interdimensional communications. Too strong, and it could damage our own ship's systems. Admiral Krixta leaned forward, studying the technical specifications David had uploaded to the ship's computers. This level of precision requires real-time adjustments based on the enemy's energy output. How can we calculate those variables in the middle of a battle? That's where human pattern recognition comes in, David said, bringing up a series of complex mathematical models. Humans are exceptionally good at identifying patterns in chaos. I can monitor their energy fluctuations and adjust the pulse frequency accordingly. General Kordax, who had insisted on joining the mission despite his usual role as a strategic advisor, shook his head skeptically. Young human battlefield conditions are not controlled laboratory environments. One miscalculation could disable our entire fleet. David turned to face the general, and Zarth saw that sharp, focused expression again, the one that suggested hidden depths beneath her husband's scholarly exterior. General, every human military engagement for the past 1,000 years has been about making split-second calculations under impossible conditions. It's what we're designed for. Design. Admiral Krixta picked up on a word choice. An interesting way to phrase it. Before David could respond, the ship's communication system activated. Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the Altair colony. Patching it through now. The holographic display shifted to show Governor Thelvas, the Vorthak administrator of Altair Prime. Her usual composed demeanor had cracked, revealing the terror beneath. Admiral Krixta, the Shadari have arrived in system. They're not attacking the colony directly. They're doing something to the star. The tactical display updated to show the Altair system in real time. The three Shadari Hive ships had positioned themselves in a triangular formation around the system star, dark energy streaming between them in complex patterns. As the officers watched in horror, the star's normal output began to fluctuate wildly. "They're destabilizing the stellar core," David said quietly, his voice carrying a chill that made everyone in the room turn to look at him. "If they succeed, the star will go supernova. They won't just be harvesting one world. They'll be feeding on the death of an entire solar system." The implications hit the assembled Vorthak officers like a physical blow. Altair Prime housed over 3 billion Vorthak citizens, and the system included 12 other inhabited worlds. A stellar collapse would destroy everything within a radius of several light years. How long before the process becomes irreversible? Admiral Krixta asked. David's hands moved rapidly across the sensor controls, analyzing the energy readings from the distant star. At their current rate of destabilization, maybe 4 hours, possibly less. "Then, we attack immediately upon arrival," General Kordax declared. "Full assault on all 3 Hive ships." "That won't work," David said firmly. "The moment they detect our approach, they'll accelerate the process. We need to cut their interdimensional communications first, then hit them before they can adapt." Zaratich studied her husband's face as he spoke. There was something in his tone and posture that she had never seen before, not just confidence, but command presence. He wasn't suggesting or recommending. He was giving orders with the expectation that they would be followed. "Explain your plan," Admiral Krixta said. David gestured to the tactical display, and the projection shifted to show the Altair system with proposed fleet positions marked in glowing symbols. "We approach from the system's edge, using the outer planets to mask our arrival. I'll need to get close enough to one of the Hive ships to analyze their quantum communication frequency." "Close enough." General Kordax's voice rose in alarm. "Young human, those ships are surrounded by energy fields that can shred a battle cruiser." "Not if we approach correctly," David said, his eyes taking on that distant, calculating look again. Shadari defensive systems are designed to respond to direct threats, but they have a blind spot. He manipulated the display to show the energy patterns around a typical Hive ship. To Zarth's eyes, it looked like an impenetrable barrier of destructive force. But David highlighted a narrow corridor that seemed to weave between the defensive fields. "There," he pointed, "a gap in their coverage that exists because of the way their energy systems interact with normal spacetime. It's only a few hundred meters wide, and the approach vector requires precise timing, but it's possible to reach the ship's outer hull." The silence in the tactical center was broken only by the steady hum of the ship's engines. Finally, Admiral Krixta spoke. "David Chun, that approach would require piloting skills that few beings in the galaxy possess. Are you suggesting we send a suicide mission?" David's smile was cold and sharp. "No, Admiral. I'm suggesting that I fly the approach myself." "Absolutely not," Zarth said immediately. "David, you're not a combat pilot. You've never even flown a military vessel." "Haven't I?" The question hung in the air, and Zarth felt a chill as she realized she didn't actually know the answer. In 3 years of marriage, the subject of David's piloting experience had never come up. General Kordax stepped forward aggressively. "Human, if you're suggesting that you possess hidden military training, now would be the time to reveal it." David was quiet for a moment, his eyes fixed on the tactical display. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight of memory and regret that Zarth had never heard before. "Humans have been preparing for this day since we first learned we weren't alone in the universe," he said slowly. "Not specifically for the Shadari, but for the possibility that we might encounter something beyond our ability to fight conventionally. Earth has contingency programs." "What kind of contingency programs?" Admiral Krixta asked. "The kind that identify individuals with specific skill sets and provide them with specialized training," David replied. "Training that most of them never use and never speak about." Zara TH felt the pieces of a puzzle she hadn't even known existed beginning to fall into place. David's unusual calmness under pressure, his ability to think tactically, his knowledge of military systems that went beyond anything a civilian xenobiologist should know. "You're not just a professor," she said quietly. "I'm a professor," David corrected. "That's not a lie or a cover story. It's what I chose to be. But before I became a professor, before I met you, I was trained for other possibilities." General Court-Axe's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "What exactly were you trained for?" David's expression became completely unreadable as he met the general's gaze. "I was trained to be the thing that humans send when diplomatic solutions fail, and conventional warfare isn't enough." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Admiral Kriksta and General Court-Axe exchanged glances, clearly reassessing everything they thought they knew about the human standing before them. "Show us," Admiral Kriksta said finally. Without another word, David moved to the pilot simulation console at the far end of the tactical center. His hands moved over the controls with practiced precision, configuring a simulation of the approach vector he had outlined. The holographic display showed a small fighter craft navigating the deadly maze of energy fields around a Shadari Hive ship. What followed was a demonstration of piloting skill that left the assembled Vorthack officer speechless. David's simulated craft moved through the defensive grid like a dancer, making micro-corrections and split-second timing adjustments that seemed impossible. The approach that had looked suicidal minutes before now appeared merely incredibly difficult. "Acceptable," Admiral Kriksa said finally, though her voice carried new respect. "But the simulation doesn't account for the psychological pressure of actual combat. Have you ever flown under fire?" David's hands stilled on the controls, and for a moment his expression showed something that might have been pain. "Yes, Admiral, I have." He didn't elaborate, but Zara TH could see the shadow of old memories in his eyes. Whatever David's past involved, it had included violence and loss. She found herself wondering how many other secrets her gentle husband carried. "Very well," Admiral Kriksta decided. "We'll implement your plan. But you won't be flying alone." "Admiral," David began. "The princess will accompany you," the Admiral continued, ignoring David's protest. Vorthack reflexes and bioelectric fields could provide additional advantages if the situation becomes critical. Zardich felt her heart race, but not from fear. If David was revealing hidden aspects of his nature, then she wanted to see them for herself. More than that, she wanted to stand beside him as he faced whatever this mission would demand. "I can pilot the secondary controls," she said, "and my bioelectric field might help disrupt their sensors." David looked at her for a long moment, and she could see him weighing options and risks. Finally, he nodded. "Together, then." As the fleet continued toward Altair, David and Zara TH prepared for their mission. The fighter craft they would use was a modified Vorthack interceptor, equipped with additional shielding and the specialized equipment David would need to analyze the Shadari communication systems. "David," Zara TH said as they performed final systems checks, "after this is over, we need to talk about your past." "I know," he replied without looking up from the instrument panel. "I should have told you before. But that part of my life, I hoped I'd never need it again." "What changed?" she asked gently. David's hands paused in their work, and he finally met her eyes. "You did. Everything I care about is in danger, and that means I can't afford to be just the gentle scholar anymore." There was something in his voice that sent a shiver through her. Not fear, but recognition. Whatever David had been before he became her husband, that person was returning. And somehow, she suspected that the galaxy was about to discover why humans had survived their climb to the stars. The proximity alarms chimed, indicating their arrival at the Altair system. Through the viewports, they could see the 3 Shadari Hive ships in the distance, dark organic shapes that seemed to absorb light itself. The star between them pulsed with unnatural rhythms, already beginning to show signs of instability. "All ships, this is Admiral Kriksta," came the voice over the communication system. "Execute formation Alpha 7. Fighter wing, you are cleared for approach." David's hands moved over the controls with smooth confidence, bringing their interceptor out of the battle cruiser's launch bay. As they accelerated toward the nearest Hive ship, Zara TH saw something in her husband's posture that made her breath catch. He wasn't nervous or afraid. He was focused and calm and absolutely certain of his abilities. This wasn't the gentle professor she had married stepping outside his comfort zone. This was someone else entirely, someone who belonged in situations like this. Beginning approach run, David announced to the fleet, initiating radio silence in 30 seconds. As their small fighter craft dove toward the massive alien vessel ahead, Zara TH realized that she was about to discover who David Chun really was. And she suspected that the answer would change everything she thought she knew about the human she had chosen to love. The interceptor cut through space toward the Shadari Hive ship like a needle threading between storms. Around them, the defensive energy fields crackled with power that could vaporize a capital ship, but David navigated the narrow corridor with precision that bordered on the supernatural. His hands moved over the controls with unconscious grace, making micro-adjustments that kept them alive from second to second. Zara TH monitored the secondary systems, but found herself watching David more than the instruments. This wasn't the careful, deliberate movement she associated with her scholarly husband. This was muscle memory, reflexes honed by training, and experience that went far deeper than he had admitted. Energy readings are off the scale, she reported, trying to keep her voice steady as another burst of hostile force passed close enough to rattle their shields. The hive ship's power output is increasing. They know we're here, David replied, his voice carrying absolute calm despite their desperate situation. But they can't target us directly without disrupting their own systems. We have maybe 3 minutes before they adapt. The hive ship loomed ahead of them, a massive organic structure that seemed to pulse with malevolent life. Its surface was covered with appendages and sensor arrays that tracked their approach, but just as David had predicted, the aliens couldn't risk firing directly without compromising their own defensive fields. There, David pointed to a section of the hull where biomechanical structures clustered around what appeared to be a massive neural interface. That's their communication nexus. Get us within 50 meters, and I can tap into their quantum frequency. Zara TH adjusted their approach vector, her Vorthack reflexes allowing her to match David's piloting with complementary maneuvers. Together, they brought the interceptor into position beside the alien hull, so close that the organic structures seemed to reach out toward their ship. Beginning frequency analysis, David announced, activating a series of instruments that Zara TH didn't recognize. The readings that appeared on his console were unlike anything in standard Vorthack technology, complex quantum mathematics that shifted and evolved in real time. David, were those instruments? She asked. That's not standard equipment. No, he admitted without taking his eyes off the readings. It's human technology, specifically designed for situations like this. Before Zara TH could respond, the hive ship's surface around them began to change. Organic conduits shifted and realigned, and she realized with growing horror that the aliens were adapting to their presence faster than David had anticipated. We need to go, she said urgently. The hull is reforming around us. Almost there, David muttered, his fingers dancing across controls with increasing speed. I just need a few more seconds to... The ship lurched violently as something massive struck their shields. Through the viewport, Zara TH saw that the hive ship had extended appendages that were trying to grasp their interceptor. More concerning, the star in the distance had begun to pulse with increasingly erratic patterns. David, the star's becoming unstable, she reported. If we don't move now... Got it, David said with satisfaction, finally, looking up from his instruments. I have their quantum signature. Transmitting data to the fleet now. He engaged the engines and pulled them away from the hive ship with a maneuver that defied physics as Zara TH understood them. The interceptor spun and dove through the energy fields with impossible grace, emerging into open space just as the hive ship's appendages closed on the space where they had been. All ships, this is David Chun, he announced over the communication system. I'm transmitting the electromagnetic pulse frequency now. Begin charging your weapons systems for synchronized discharge. Admiral Krickstad's voice crackled back over the radio. Confirmed, we have the frequency. All ships prepare for coordinated electromagnetic pulse in 60 seconds. As the Vorthack fleet maneuvered into position around the 3 hive ships, Zara TH found herself studying David's profile. His expression was calm and focused, but there was something else there, a sense of satisfaction that seemed almost predatory. "David," she said quietly, "how did you know exactly where their communication nexus would be located?" "Pattern recognition," he replied, but his tone suggested there was more to it. "Every biological system follows certain organizational principles." "That's not an answer," she pressed. "You knew exactly what to look for, and you had the precise equipment to analyze it. That's not coincidence." David was quiet for a moment, his hands steady on the controls as he maneuvered their interceptor to a safe distance from the impending electromagnetic barrage. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight of secrets finally being revealed. "Earth has been monitoring the galaxy for longer than most species realize," he said slowly. "We've been watching, learning, preparing for threats that might someday come. The Shadari have been encountered before in other galaxies by other civilizations that didn't survive the experience." The implications of his words sent a chill through Zarth. "How long have humans known about them?" "Since before first contact with the Vorthak Empire," David admitted. "Since before we officially joined the Galactic Alliance. We've been developing countermeasures for interdimensional parasites for over a century." "And you?" she asked. "What's your role in all of this?" David's smile was sharp and cold. "I'm what humans call a deep cover specialist, trained to integrate into alien societies and provide intelligence and tactical support when existential threats emerge." The words hit her like a physical blow. "You've been spying on my people for 3 years." "No," David said firmly, meeting her eyes for the first time since beginning his explanation. "That assignment ended the day I met you. Everything between us is real, Zara. My love for you, my respect for your people, my choice to make a life here, all of that is genuine." Before Zarth could respond, Admiral Krikstad's voice filled their cockpit. "All ships report ready. Beginning electromagnetic pulse in 10 seconds. The space around the 3 Hive ships suddenly erupted with coordinated energy discharges from the entire Vorthak fleet. The electromagnetic pulse that resulted was unlike anything Zarth had ever seen, a wave of force that seemed to bend reality itself around the alien vessels. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The Shadari ships, which had been moving with fluid, organic grace, suddenly became rigid and awkward. The dark energy fields around them flickered and failed, and the ominous pulsing of the star began to stabilize. "Direct hit on all targets," Admiral Krikstad announced. "Their interdimensional communications are disrupted. All ships engage at will." The Vorthak fleet opened fire with everything they had. Energy weapons and kinetic projectiles struck the Hive ships, which suddenly seemed vulnerable in a way they hadn't been moments before. Without their connection to the Dark Realm, the Shadari couldn't regenerate their defenses or adapt to the assault. But even as the battle turned in their favor, Zarth found herself focused on David. The revelation of his true background had shattered her understanding of their relationship, and she struggled to reconcile the gentle professor she loved with the deep-cover operative he had revealed himself to be. "Was any of it real?" she asked quietly as they watched the battle unfold around them. "All of it," David said firmly. "Zara, I was assigned to study Vorthak culture and capabilities, but that mission ended the moment I realized I was falling in love with you. Everything that happened after that was my choice, not my orders." "How can I trust that?" The pain in her voice was evident even to herself. David reached across the narrow cockpit and took her hand in his. "Because if this had still been a mission, I would never have revealed any of this. My cover was perfect. I could have lived as David Chan, the xenobiology professor, for the rest of my life, and no one would have known the difference." "Then, why tell me now?" she asked. "Because the Shadari represent a threat that goes beyond anything the galaxy has faced before," David explained. "And stopping them is going to require more than academic knowledge and gentle diplomacy. It's going to require the skills and resources that I've spent years keeping hidden." One of the Hive ships exploded in a brilliant flash of light, its organic hull finally succumbing to the concentrated Vorthak firepower. But the other 2 ships were already beginning to adapt to their disrupted communications, their movements becoming more coordinated again. "They're regaining their connection to the Dark Realm," David observed, studying his instruments. "The electromagnetic pulse won't hold them indefinitely." "How long do we have?" Zarth asked. "Minutes, maybe less." David's hands were already moving over the controls, preparing for another approach run. I need to get close enough to one of the remaining ships to plant a quantum disruptor. A what? Zara TH had never heard the term before. Human technology, David explained grimly. A device that creates a permanent interference field, cutting them off from interdimensional space entirely. But it has to be placed directly against their hull, and the approach will be even more dangerous than before. Zara TH felt her heart's racing as she realized what David was proposing. That's suicide. Even with your piloting skills, the odds are better than letting them escape and warn the rest of their kind that the galaxy has developed countermeasures, David finished. Zara, if even one of these ships gets away, the Shadari will adapt. The next attack will be unstoppable. She stared at him, seeing not just the gentle professor she had married, but the trained operative he had always been. Someone who had been shaped and prepared for exactly this kind of desperate choice. There has to be another way, she said. There isn't, David replied, his voice carrying absolute certainty. This is what I was trained for. This is why Earth developed people like me. As he spoke, the second hive ship regained enough functionality to begin moving toward the damaged star again. The electromagnetic pulse was wearing off, and soon they would be back to full power. All right, Zara said finally, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. But we do this together. David looked at her sharply. Zara, together, she repeated firmly. If you're about to reveal the full extent of your capabilities, then I want to see who I really married. And if you don't make it back, then neither do I. For a moment, David's carefully controlled expression cracked, showing the deep emotion beneath. I love you, he said simply. I love you too, she replied. All of you, even the parts you've been hiding. David nodded and activated the quantum disruptor device, a piece of technology that looked like nothing Zara TH had ever seen. As he programmed its activation sequence, she realized that this was the moment when everything would change, not just for them, but for the entire galaxy. Whatever happened next would reveal the true scope of human capabilities to the universe. And somehow, Zara TH suspected that David Chun was just the beginning of what her husband's species could do when they stopped pretending to be harmless. The second approach run toward the remaining Shadari hive ships was unlike anything in the tactical manuals. David pushed their interceptor through defensive fields that had adapted to recognize their previous infiltration, making split-second calculations that seemed to bend the laws of physics. But this time, Zara TH was ready for what she saw. Her husband wasn't just an exceptionally skilled pilot. He was something that human military doctrine had apparently been developing for decades, a weapons system disguised as a person. Quantum Disruptor is armed, David announced, his voice carrying the same clinical calm he had shown throughout the mission. I'll need exactly 47 seconds against the hull to complete the installation. 47 seconds? Zara TH monitored their approach vector while watching David's hands move over controls with mechanical precision. In the middle of a firefight, the device needs time to synchronize with their quantum frequency, David explained, threading their ship between energy blasts that could have atomized them. Any less, and it won't create a permanent disruption. Through their viewports, the massive hive ship grew larger as they approached. This close, Zara TH could see the intricate biological structures that covered its hull, organs, and neural pathways that pulsed with alien intelligence. The ship knew they were coming, and it was preparing defenses. David, she said quietly as they entered the final approach phase. After this is over, are there others? Other humans like you? Yes, he replied without hesitation. But, Zara, you need to understand something. Earth didn't create us to be conquerors or spies. We were designed to be protectors. Everything we can do, everything we were trained for, exists for moments like this. Their interceptor slammed into the hive ship's hull with enough force to crack their viewports. David immediately activated magnetic clamps while Zara TH deployed the quantum disruptor, a device that hummed with energies she didn't recognize. Around them, the alien ship's defenses began to converge on their location. Disruptor is synchronizing, David reported, his hands dancing over control interfaces while monitoring half a dozen readouts simultaneously. 39 seconds remaining. The hull beneath them began to shift as the Shadari attempted to dislodge their ship. Organic appendages erupted from the surface, trying to grasp their interceptor and crush it. But David had anticipated this, firing precisely targeted energy bursts that severed the appendages before they could establish a grip. "Where did you learn to do that?" Zara TH asked, watching her husband demonstrate combat reflexes that seemed superhuman. "Human children play video games," David replied, his tone almost conversational despite their desperate situation. "But some of those games are actually training simulations. We've been identifying and developing tactical reflexes since childhood." "Training simulations for what?" "For this," David said simply. "For the day when humanity might be the only thing standing between civilization and extinction." The quantum disruptor's countdown reached 20 seconds when the Hive ship made a desperate attempt to escape. The massive vessel began to shift toward interdimensional space, trying to retreat to the dark realm where human technology couldn't follow. "They're trying to phase out," Zara TH observed, watching energy readings spike across their instruments. "If they escape now, they won't," David said with absolute certainty. His hands moved over the controls with inhuman speed, activating systems that Zara TH didn't recognize. Suddenly, their small interceptor was generating an energy field that seemed to lock the massive Hive ship in normal space. "David, what is that?" "Our ship doesn't have that capability. Standard interceptors don't," he agreed. "But this one was modified with human technology before the mission. Emergency protocols in case standard tactics failed." The implications of his words hit her like a physical blow. "You knew this would happen. You knew the electromagnetic pulse wouldn't be enough." "I suspected," David admitted. "The Shadari have encountered electromagnetic warfare before. They adapt quickly. But they've never faced quantum-locked interdimensional barriers." "Quantum-locked?" Zara TH stared at him in growing amazement. "David, that technology doesn't exist. The energy requirements alone." "It exists," he said quietly. "It's just not publicly known. Earth has been developing it for 70 years, preparing for threats like this." The quantum disruptor completed its synchronization with a harmonic tone that seemed to resonate through the hull of the Hive ship. Immediately, the massive vessel shuddered as its connection to the dark realm was severed permanently. Around them, the defensive energy fields flickered and died. "Disruptor is active," David announced to the fleet. "Target is locked in normal space. All ships engage at will." The Vorthack fleet opened fire with renewed intensity, and this time the Hive ship had no interdimensional defenses to protect it. Energy weapons tore through its organic hull, while kinetic projectiles shattered its neural networks. Within minutes, the massive vessel was drifting as a lifeless hulk. But David wasn't finished. As their interceptor pulled away from the destroyed Hive ship, he was already plotting a course toward the third and final vessel. His movements showed no fatigue, no hesitation, just the mechanical efficiency of someone executing a pre-planned operation. "David, stop," Zara TH said firmly. "The third ship is already retreating. The threat is neutralized." "Retreating isn't enough," David replied, his voice carrying a cold finality that chilled her. "It has to be destroyed completely, or it will warn others of our capabilities." For the first time since the battle began, Zara TH felt afraid, not of the Shadari, but of what her husband was becoming. The general professor she had married was gone, replaced by something that calculated in terms of acceptable losses and permanent solutions. "David, look at me," she said urgently. "Look at me, and tell me you're still the man I married." He turned toward her, and for a moment she saw a flicker of the uncertainty and gentleness that she remembered. "Zara, the mission parameters require—" "Forget the mission parameters," she interrupted. "Tell me what David Chun wants to do." The struggle on his face was visible as two different sets of training and instinct warred within him. Finally, he closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he opened them again, some of the mechanical coldness had faded. "I want to go home," he said quietly. "I want to tend our garden and heal injured animals and never think about quantum disruptors again." "Then, that's what we do," Zara said firmly. "The third ship is leaving the system. The star is stabilizing. The immediate threat is over." David nodded slowly, his hands relaxing their grip on the controls. Around them, the Vorthack fleet was already moving to secure the area and tend to their own damaged vessels. The crisis had passed, but Zara TH realized that their personal crisis was just beginning. As they returned to the fleet's flagship, She found herself studying David's profile again. How many other secrets did he carry? How many other capabilities had Earth's government hidden behind the facade of peaceful exploration? The other humans in the Galactic Alliance, she said finally. How many of them are like you? More than you'd expect, David replied. Fewer than you'd fear. Earth learned long ago that obvious military strength invites preemptive attacks, but hidden strength that protects everyone, including my people, especially your people, David said, meeting her eyes. Zara, everything I did today, everything I am capable of, exists to protect the things I care about. And you were at the top of that list. When they docked with the flagship, Emperor Vextar was waiting for them in the landing bay. The massive Vorthak ruler studied David with new eyes, clearly reassessing everything he thought he knew about the human who had married his daughter. David Chun, the Emperor said formally, on behalf of the Vorthak Empire, I thank you for your service today. But I think it's time for some honest conversation about exactly who and what you represent. Yes, Your Majesty, David replied, his posture respectful but confident, though I think you'll find that the answers are more reassuring than concerning. As they walked toward the conference rooms where the full debriefing would take place, Zara TH reflected on everything that had changed. Her gentle scholar husband had revealed himself to be something far more complex, a protector with capabilities that spanned multiple disciplines and technologies that redefined what she thought she knew about human development. But perhaps most importantly, she had seen him choose love over duty when it mattered. When his training demanded the complete elimination of threats, he had listened to her voice and chosen mercy instead. David, she said as they paused outside the conference room, I need to know something. When you told me you love me, when you chose to stop being just the operative and start being my husband, was that part of your mission? David turned to face her fully, and in his eyes she saw the answer before he spoke. No, Zura, that was the moment my mission ended and my life began. Everything else, the training, the hidden capabilities, the contingency plans, all of that exists to protect this, to protect us. He took her hands in his, and she felt the same gentle touch that had first attracted her to him. The professor and the operative were the same person, she realized. The gentleness wasn't a disguise, it was what motivated everything else. The galaxy just learned that humans are more dangerous than anyone suspected, she observed. No, David corrected with a smile that held both warmth and warning. The galaxy just learned that humans are more protective than anyone suspected. There's a difference, and it's everything. As they entered the conference room, where Emperor Vextar, Admiral Krixta, and the senior military staff waited, Zara TH realized that the balance of galactic power had shifted today. Not because humanity had revealed weapons or fleets, but because they had demonstrated something far more valuable. The ability to identify existential threats and neutralize them before they could spread. The gentle professor she had married was still there, still tending to injured creatures and pursuing academic knowledge. But now she understood that this gentleness existed within a framework of capabilities that spanned the spectrum from healing to destruction, all focused on a single principle, protecting the things that mattered. And she had the distinct feeling that the galaxy had just become a much safer place, precisely because it was now under the quiet protection of beings who preferred to tend gardens, but were prepared to break entire star systems when necessary. The Shadari threat was ended, but the implications of how it had been ended were just beginning to unfold. As David began his explanation to the assembled Vorthak leadership, Zara TH found herself wondering how many other times in galactic history similar threats had been quietly eliminated by protectors no one knew existed. The answer, she suspected, would change everything she thought she knew about the true nature of peace in the galaxy.